Hi, thanks again for tuning into the podcast, Asking for a Friend. My name's Ben, and today we are kicking off a 3-week series about racism. Now, we acknowledge that this is a divisive issue in both the church and our world, and we don't have all the answers. And we understand that there are many views on this topic. We've invited Jessica, Lola, and Chastity, 3 of our Black and Brown members, to share their personal experience and give us insight into how they view this topic. These views are not necessarily representative of all of LIFEchurch or its leadership, but we believe it's important for all of us to grapple with the complexities of this issue. In these 3 episodes, we'll be exploring Jessica and Chastity's and Lola's experience in the overall church, why they think the phrase "I don't see color" is offensive, and how they see racism is still prevalent today. We hope that this stirs the discussion in a positive way and that you appreciate the conversation we have today. Now, let's get into the episode. Here's Josh, Chastity, Lola, and Jessica.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Asking for a Friend. My name is Josh, and I have today with me Chastity, Jessica, and Dr. Lola. In this episode, the question we are going to tackle is, how have you experienced the church as a Black person? Okay? Mm-hmm. So who wants to start?
So I've been in Iowa 12 years this June. Way longer than I anticipated. And I would say the majority of Black churches that I've been to, I feel received differently than when you come to a majority white church. Sometimes I've gone to white churches and I just feel like an alien because I'm stared at so much that it makes it uncomfortable. I'm going to just be honest. And it makes me not want to return because I'm clearly viewed as an other when I enter into this space. I went to a women's conference at a church before. The church actually closed, or they renamed, regardless. And the pastor came up to me and said, "How does it feel to be here as a Black woman?" And I was just like, I don't even know how to answer your question. Because I really didn't. I was very shocked that she asked that. And it's just been an experience. I mean, it hasn't been the most welcoming experience. I've gone to a lot of them, and I've liked LIFEchurch the best compared to others. But, you know, if this is the place where we're welcoming folks, we need to truly welcome folks, not just folks that look like us. Because it doesn't make you want to come back. Yeah.
Jessica?
Well, let's see. I've been in the United States going on 10 years now. And when I first came from Nigeria, I stayed with a Black family, African Americans. And so I went to a Black church, which was not very different from a Nigerian church. And then afterwards, I went to a Nigerian church for a couple of years and then kind of just, drifted away from God for a few years. And when I came back, I was part of a non-denominational church that was diverse, and it was on the East Coast, and so it was really a melting pot. But I also had other people, friends of mine in that church that were also Nigerian that, I would sit with and worship with. And so it didn't feel like I wasn't welcome there or I wasn't a part of the church because I had people there who looked like me and who I could interact with. And so when I was coming to Iowa, that was one of my goals, was to get into a church that had other Black people. I had a conversation with God, and I told him, for sure, I am not the person you sent to, what's the word again, to, diverse a church or diversify a church. It is not my calling. No, it can't do. And so I was really excited to come to LIFEchurch and just experience, just diversity in Iowa. And I think it's just now I'm just now really understanding the difference between diversity in Iowa and diversity in the East Coast, and understanding that they're not the same. What's considered diverse in Iowa is not diverse by East Coast standards, and so for me, there's been an adjustment of going, okay, I do feel welcomed here, but I don't feel like I belong. And so, to put it plainly, I struggle with imposter syndromes, when I am in a worship setting where I'm the only black female or the only black person, or where it's just so different from my, experience of worship. It's just so hard to feel like, yeah, we're one in Christ. We belong, because there's nothing for me to connect with, on a deep personal level. And so so in a nutshell, that has been my experience. It's just this constant battle of telling myself in my head that I belong, and trying to silence that very real and tangible feeling of imposter syndrome. And yeah.
Jess?
So I'm from Iowa, born and raised, Davenport, and then I came to Iowa City to go to school here. I grew up in the Baptist church, which is a traditionally black church, so culturally it's just very different than coming here to LIFEchurch. But when I was growing up, my church split up when I was 15, so I kind of took a break from really I guess, being a Christian, or really feeling connected to the church. My church was when I joined the gospel choir at the University of Iowa, because I love to sing, and that's how I felt closest to God. But eventually, after graduating, I felt called, because I kept meeting other people that helped me learn what church hurt was and all that stuff, to come back to church. So a friend of mine went church hopping, and I did go look at some black churches. I looked at some other churches, but ended up at LIFEchurch because it was a very giving church. I was impressed by Sevolution, and just the different discussions that people were having, and people seemed generally nice. When I walked in, I did feel welcome, but it's always a different welcome because I'm from Iowa, so I'm a little bit more used to what it's like compared to other black friends who aren't from Iowa. So it's just, I'm like, it is what it is. So it doesn't affect me. That culture shock that all of my friends that are coming from the East or West Coast does not affect me at all, because I grew up from age 5, kindergarten, usually being the only black person, if not one other black person in the classroom. So that hasn't affected me as much. But I did know, the reason for staying at LIFEchurch was because I knew I needed to be here. And pursuing other people, I felt like in the beginning, while people are welcoming, they're not as approachable at first. And if you have a different cultural understanding, it's just a little bit more difficult, so I had to push myself to be in there. It would be very difficult if you were a super introvert and didn't have the drive or that God is giving me to stay here. So that's been my experience. I really do love coming to LIFEchurch. I love the people here, but I do often feel myself wanting that extra element of a black Christian woman experience, because you are able to talk about our Christian life with that element that is always real for me. So
I think praise and worship has been a huge difference for me. It's very rare for me to find a church in Iowa that feels like home in the aspect of praise and worship. Like running, because you are just so overwhelmed with the Holy Spirit. And I've done it a few times here, and I'm sure people are like, what is wrong with this lady? I can remember being in the front, speaking in tongues, walking back and forth. And I'm sure somebody was like, but I just didn't care, because I know that is normal for me. right? And I'm not performing. It's just who I am, and it's what I'm used to, and it's what I've grown up with. And so I miss the collective praise and worship, vocal. My hands are lifted up. You know, my heart is ready for a blessing from you. Like that moment is very lacking here in Iowa.
It's funny because this week, or I think it was over the weekend, I kind of wrote in my journal and I was telling God how I miss that. Like I miss like corporate worship where I can jump and scream. I am a yeller. I scream and just say what's just kind of like just express myself. And so I feel like that's what is often I find is lacking is I want to fully express myself in worship, fully express myself in community, just the way that God has called and made me to express myself. But then I find that I walk into a space and I'm given a box and it's like, you can't do anything outside of this box, and so you have to kind of stay within the confines of that box, and it over time, you feel like you've lost a part of like who you are. You feel like you've lost a just like a certain way that you connect with God, and so that's kind of what I found in my experience with like praise and worship. And so now what I just do it by myself in my house, but it's different because there's just something about when you're able to do it corporately, and I don't know if you guys have experienced it, but I feel like it's easy for me to mold and shape myself to fit different styles of worship, but it's very hard for the other person to mold and shape themselves to fit my style of worship. So it's like, while I can go and worship anywhere, it's just hard to get people to just worship the way that I want to worship, loud and expressive and obnoxious sometimes, and so it's,
I love it.
My experience with praise and worship here, again, from Iowa, so I'm a little used to some things, but I did grow up 18 years of my life in a black church, so I'm used to people running up and down the aisles, screaming, shouting, and also the spontaneity of we're just going to start in the middle of service, we're going to start a new song. And if this song that we did start when it's supposed to be prescribed is 10, 15 minutes long, we're here, we're going to start praising and jumping and
never
and
get
shouting.
to the sermon.
No, we get to the sermon. It's going to be a 3-hour service.
I've been in churches where the preacher never, you just like, just keep
Oh,
saying
really? No, I remember always, the sermon's going to happen. If we're supposed to be at 12, but it's going to be 2 p.m., we're still having the sermon. And if the choir comes back up and we're so filled, like that's my childhood. I recognize that's a cultural difference. I also recognize there's different ways to praise God just because this is not how I praise. Like it doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. And the one thing I do value about coming to LIFEchurch, because my experiences are really just my church and LIFEchurch, is that because it was a cultural thing for me, it was a tradition, I didn't really get into the music the way of someone building a relationship with God was. I was just singing words growing up. But now I listen to the words. I read the words. It means something to me. So that's the one thing I took from it. It took a while to get there. When I first came here, I was like, I'm not here for this music. What is going on here? It's slow. It's a little boring. But now, like, there was a period where I only listened to contemporary Christian music because it was starting to mean a lot more to me. But then I had to get back to my gospel music. When I go back home every once in a while and go with my mom, I'm like, oh yeah, this is, it just fills your soul in a different way.
I think like when it comes to praise and worship, and just even when it comes to music, I think there could be also a stereotype that says slower and calmer is more spiritual, because then you're really, taking it in, you're really engaging God, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Oftentimes we talk about head knowledge and heart knowledge and how you can know about God in your head and really not be transformed in your heart. And what's in your head needs to flow through your heart. I also feel like people do relate to God that way, either intellectually or, just from their heart emotionally. And I feel like much of the Black just being a Black Christian or growing up in the Black church is you first connect to God in your heart and then your mind catches up. And I think it's kind of almost the opposite, where it's like, in non-Black churches or just non-Black, growing up as a non-Black Christian, it's more you know Jesus in your head, you know things about God, and your heart kind of catches up. And so there's kind of like, which is, there's kind of this, which is better, or which is the actual, way to do it. And it's more like, well, yeah, of course, it's mind to heart, and it's like, if it's just heart, then it's not solid. It feels like it's not solid. And so I think that tends to be this, like, it's all emotion and no, no truth to build on, and all of that, all of that. But I do believe that, like, there is space for it to be from your heart and your mind catches up, and there is space for it to be from your mind and your heart catches up. And I think that's just that's diversity, is that we get to, like, worship God differently and not make one form more, better than the other form.
I think the biggest difference that I've noticed, and it's not for everyone, is that at least my church, you were given permission to worship and praise and use your whole body. It's a bodily experience, whereas a lot of people I know that didn't grow up that way, like, they were taught that is not what you're supposed to do. So I do like the diversity that we're seeing, the growing diversity of, like, some people just seeing what's possible and what's okay.
Do you feel like you have something that you want to close with in regards to your experience in the church, or do you feel like you got everything out that you wanted to for this particular segment?
I want to say, like, complacency is an easy thing to get into, because as I said, I started in 2017 and it was way less diverse than it is now, but it has gradually gotten more diverse, and that is an awesome testament to what this church is doing here. People are coming here because they love the heart of the church, but that doesn't mean you stop there. Like, you should, every church, if you see people are coming in and the goal is to not live by that standard that Sunday mornings are the most segregated time in this country, then we should be actively trying to find ways to support diversity racially, financially, in all aspects of what diversity truly means, disability, to make sure that everyone feels like welcome. And I believe, I'm just going to say, I believe LIFEchurch is trying to do some of that, but every church can do better and do more. And I think it's great that people feel comfortable to talk about it, at least this first conversation. So if people are coming, that means they want to be here. So don't give them reasons to leave.
I do know that when I was on staff, I had Black and brown parents coming up to me excited. They were happy to see somebody that looked like themselves on staff. And like, there was a new family who they were Nigerian. I don't even know if they're still here because I never see them, but both of the parents are PhDs. They were excited to see that I was Black and that I was Nigerian and that I had a PhD. And their kids were just, beautiful chocolate drops. But, like, they made it a point to come and greet me every Sunday. And, I'm so happy to see you. It's great to see a Black lady in leadership. And by no means do I belong on staff here. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But what I do believe is that we can't just say diversity in the pews and not have it in the leadership.
When I was planning to move to Iowa and I was looking at churches, the first thing I always went to was our team. Like, I want to see who your pastors, your worship leaders, your children ministry people are. And I kept looking, and I was like, yeah, they're all white. Ain't for me. And I remember coming to LIFEchurch and seeing Kadeen, who was on staff, on there. And that's all I needed. It was just one. One was all I needed. And I was like, okay, great. They have one. All right, we're going to check them out. And I feel like sometimes it's hard to explain to non-Blacks what that does for you. I feel like just on a human level, we've all felt at certain points in our life alone. We've all felt like we're experiencing something that nobody else understands, that nobody else gets. That's how it feels to be Black and not have any other Black person in that space, is to feel loneliness, like actual loneliness. And I feel like sometimes it's just hard to communicate that and get people to understand. This is why we push for diversity. This is why we push for representation, because we want to know that we're not alone. We want to know that we have, someone else who understands, someone else who, can, sees me and can, just get me without me having to provide so much context. And so that's the goal. That's the reason why, we cry diversity on every level. At the women's conference, I met a mom who happened to be Nigerian, and it was just a good, just a divine meeting, and just really, really good. And she has a son who comes to my elementary class, and he's always like, "Mommy, why are there so many peach people? There's nobody that looks like me in my class." And that's a 6-7-year-old. And I know what that feels like for me in my mid-20s, and to think that he is also having to experience that, might not have the words to express that feeling of it's just me. And so it's like, the cry for diversity is not just for me, but it's also for, the next generation and the people who are coming after us. And if there is any better place or any better group of people to champion that, it is the church. It is us Christians, really, that should be at the forefront of bringing change.
Well, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Asking for a Friend. This is actually the first part of a 3-part series. So be looking forward to the next segment coming up soon. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of Asking for a Friend, where we discuss Chastity, Lola's, and Jessica's experience about being Black and brown in the church. We have other resources linked down below from our guests. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to our podcast. We're on Apple, Google, and Spotify. We're always looking to engage with new questions, so if you have one, submit it below by following the link. Thanks again for tuning into this episode for Asking for a Friend. We'll see you next time.